For a long time, I believed the elevator was the most honest thing in the building. That sounds like a strange way to describe an elevator, but when you work nights long enough, you start ranking objects by how reliably they behave. You stop trusting people first, then you stop trusting your own instincts. Eventually, you cling to whatever remains consistent, whatever repeats itself without trying to convince you it has feelings. The elevator didn't have moods. It didn't get distracted. It didn't get tired. It just did what it was built to do. And in a building full of systems, air circulation, motion sensors, timed lighting, automatic locks, that kind of simplicity felt almost comforting. The elevator ran on commands. It didn't improvise. It didn't hesitate. It didn't reinterpret your presence. It didn't require you to act a certain way in order to function. At least, that's what I thought. The elevator was old, not antique, not charming. Just old in the way that suggests it has been ignored for years but kept alive because replacing it would be expensive and inconvenient. The inside smelled faintly of worn carpet and metal, like the air itself had been recycled too many times. The buttons were clouded from fingerprints. The floor numbers were rubbed smooth in places where hundreds of bored hands had pressed them without thinking. The doors closed with a tired, sliding exhale. The cables groaned softly when it started moving. There was a small delay between the press of a button and the first shift of the cabin, just long enough to remind you you were riding something mechanical. But the most important thing about it wasn't its age, it was its consistency. The elevator moved at the same pace every time. It made the same faint rattle at the same point between the 4th and 5th floors. It always gave a tiny shiver right before stopping, like it was bracing itself. If you stared at the digital display above the doors, you could predict exactly when the next number would appear. 3 seconds, another number, 3 seconds, another. Predictability like that matters at night, because night shifts turn your mind into a pattern-seeking machine. In the quiet, you start depending on repetition the way people depend on daylight. You listen for the same HVAC cycle, the same elevator hum, the same distant click of a timer. Those small, boring confirmations become proof that the world is still working. When something interrupts that rhythm, you notice immediately, not because it's loud, because it's wrong. For months, nothing about the elevator felt wrong. It made its occasional maintenance trips the way it always did, usually once or twice after midnight, as if some automated routine woke up briefly to check that everything still worked. It would go from the lobby to the 6th floor, then back down. Sometimes it stopped at the 10th, sometimes the 7th. Always empty, always quiet, always exactly what a building does when it's running on autopilot. And then, one night, it stopped on a floor that no one used. It didn't stop the way elevators stop when someone presses the button. There was no chime, no cheerful ding, no soft light change. It stopped like a thought stopping mid-sentence. And the only reason I noticed was because I wasn't looking at it when it happened. That's the part that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. The way the event seemed to require my inattention. Because once you realize something changes only when you aren't observing it, you stop feeling like you're monitoring a building. You start feeling like you're participating in a test. And when you work nights, alone, in an empty building that doesn't need you for anything except to confirm that everything is still normal, the idea of being tested is worse than the idea of being watched. Watched implies interest. Tested implies expectation. I worked overnight security in a 12-story office building on the far edge of the city, the kind of place that looks impressive in daylight and meaningless after dark. During the day, it was all clean glass and polished stone, and people wearing badges that clipped neatly to their collars. By night, it became a shell, an expensive container full of silence. The building wasn't abandoned technically, it was inactive. That's the word management used. Inactive. As if it was simply resting. But buildings don't rest the way people do. They keep moving. They keep breathing. They keep cycling their air and running their pumps and letting their electrical systems maintain the illusion of readiness. And if you're the only person inside, you start noticing how active inactive really is. My job was what you'd expect. Lock the building down after the last employees left, monitor the camera system, do rounds, check key access points, and keep a log. If an alarm triggered, I investigated. If a door showed as ajar on the panel, I confirmed it. If anything broke routine, I documented it and called it in. On paper, it was simple. In reality, night work changes your relationship with time. I clocked in at exactly 10 p.m. every shift. That mattered. I liked the precision of it. If you do the same thing at the same time long enough, your body starts to believe you're in control. I'd hang my jacket in the small security office near the lobby, the one with a narrow window looking out into the empty entrance. The office smelled like cheap coffee and old paper. The chair had a crack in the leather where someone's keys had worn a line over years. There were 2 monitors for the cameras, one for the alarm panel, and a desk lamp that made the corner feel smaller than it was. First task, perimeter check. I walked the lobby slowly, listening to the sound of my shoes on the tile, the echo that always returned half a second late, like the building was repeating me under its breath. I checked the glass doors, the metal frames, the locks. I rattled the handles lightly, enough to feel the resistance. I checked the side entrance, the stairwell door, the service elevator access. Then I moved to the loading dock, which always felt colder than the rest of the building, even when the heating was on. That area had a different kind of silence, wider, emptier. The overhead lights buzzed faintly like insects. After that, I did my first full interior round. Hallways, conference rooms, break areas, stairwells. Each one had a specific smell. Carpet, cleaning chemicals, dust that lived inside vents. Each one had its own sound signature. The hum of fluorescents, the faint tapping of pipes, the distant rush of air through ducts. By 10:40, I was back in the security office with my logbook open. That logbook became the most important object on my shift. Not because anyone read it closely, most people didn't, but because writing in it created a record that made the hours feel real. If you don't mark time at night, the night starts marking you. You lose chunks. You forget thoughts. You drift. And drifting is how you start feeling things that might not be there. So, I wrote everything down. 10:05, main doors secure. 10:12, side entrance secure. 10:26, loading dock secure. 10:38, floors 1 to 3 checked, no activity. The repetition was soothing. I monitored cameras in a strict order. I always started with the lobby feed, then the main hall, then stairwells, then the elevator feeds, then the long corridor on floor 5 that always looked slightly darker than it should, no matter how bright the lights were. I learned every camera angle by heart. I knew which ones had a slight delay, which ones flickered when the HVAC kicked on, which ones had a dead pixel cluster in the top left corner, and the elevator feed. I watched more than I needed to, not because I was suspicious, because it was a moving piece in a static building. It was something that changed position, something that proved the building system still had momentum. The elevator had 2 feeds, one from the lobby hallway showing the doors, and one inside the cab itself. Grainy, black and white, slightly tilted. You could see the mirrored wall and the handrail and the floor display above the doors. Most nights the elevator didn't move at all, and when it did, it was predictable, quiet, automatic. That predictability became the standard I measured the entire building against. If the elevator behaved, everything felt okay, which is why the night it didn't behave didn't feel like a malfunction. It felt like the building was choosing when I was allowed to notice. It happened at 1:12 a.m. I remember the time because I had just finished a routine check-in call with the dispatcher, the one we were required to do every night at 1 o'clock. The call lasted less than a minute, just confirming I was on site. Everything was normal, no incidents. When I hung up, the office felt quieter than usual, as if the sound of another human voice had been temporarily keeping something at bay. I turned back to the monitors. On the elevator cab feed, the floor display was changing. 3, 4, 5. It was unusual for it to move that early, but not unheard of. The maintenance cycles sometimes triggered whenever the building system ran its nightly diagnostics. It wasn't random, it just wasn't explained to me in detail. I watched it climb without thinking too hard about it. Then it paused. On 9. Not a normal pause. The number didn't flicker the way it sometimes did when the camera lagged. It held steady. Clear. 9. I waited for the familiar shiver, the pre-stop tremor. I waited for the chime. I waited for the doors to open. They didn't. The cabin stayed closed. The number stayed on 9. The camera image didn't glitch, didn't distort, didn't drop frames. It just waited. And I felt something in my own body mirror it. A reflexive stillness. Like when you realize you've been talking while someone else is silent, and you stop mid-word because you suddenly feel observed. I leaned forward, closer to the monitor, not because it would help, but because proximity is a human way of trying to gain control over uncertainty. Then I did what I always did when something looked mildly wrong. I checked another feed. I clicked to the 9th floor hallway camera, the corridor outside the elevator doors. Empty. Of course it was empty. There were no night staff, no cleaning crew scheduled, no deliveries. The building was sealed. That was the entire point of my job. The hallway looked like every other hallway. Carpet pattern repeating, lights humming softly, doors closed, a drinking fountain reflecting a faint sheen. No movement, no shadows, nothing. I stayed on that feed for maybe 2 seconds, long enough to confirm there wasn't a person waiting there. Then I clicked back to the elevator cab, and the moment I did, the floor display changed. 9, 10. Like the elevator had only been paused for the exact duration my attention had been elsewhere. The cabin resumed movement smoothly as if nothing had happened. My first thought was that the system had corrected itself. My second thought was that the camera had lagged. So I rewound the footage. Security systems record continuously, but you can scrub back in small windows. I pulled the last minute, slowed it down, watched the elevator climb. On the recording, it never paused. It went from 8 to 9 to 10 at a perfectly consistent rhythm. No hesitation, no hold. I watched it again. Same. I watched it a third time, slower, frame by frame. No pause, no anomaly. The elevator, according to the recorded evidence, had behaved flawlessly. But live, in the moment, it had stopped long enough for me to notice it, long enough for me to feel that uncomfortable silence gather, long enough for my body to respond. Then it resumed, only after I looked away and back again, like it was embarrassed to be caught doing something unnecessary. I sat back in my chair and felt a very specific kind of unease settle in, one that didn't feel like fear. Fear is loud, it spikes, it demands. This was quieter. This felt like being excluded from information you were supposed to have. I told myself it was nothing, a minor sensor reading, a mechanical correction, but the part of me that worked nights, the part that survived on pattern recognition, couldn't ignore one thing. The elevator pause happened live, but it did not exist in the record. That meant either I imagined it, which felt unlikely because I was alert and I remember the number clearly, or the system had produced an event only in the moment, then erased it from evidence the second it knew I was checking. And once you start considering that possibility, you stop trusting what cameras show, because cameras are supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be the part of the building that doesn't care about you. That night, for the first time, it occurred to me. Maybe the cameras weren't there to show me what was happening. Maybe they were there to shape what I was allowed to believe. After that first inconsistency, I did what most people do when something doesn't make sense. I tightened my routine, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, but internally I became more deliberate, more structured. I followed the order of my camera checks with a kind of quiet precision that bordered on ritual, because when something feels wrong and the system says everything is normal, the easiest conclusion is that the problem is you. Fatigue, pattern misfire, night shift brain. I'd seen it happen to other guards before. Guys who started double-checking doors that were clearly locked, who swore they heard movement in empty stairwells, who got jumpy around HVAC noises they'd heard 100 times before. Management always used the same word for it, adjustment period. So I assumed I was adjusting. I started watching the elevator feed more carefully, but not obsessively. Obsession makes you sloppy. It makes you see things that aren't there. Instead, I built it into my normal scan cycle. Lobby, corridor, stairwell, elevator, repeat. For 3 nights, nothing unusual happened. The elevator behaved perfectly, too perfectly. That's the part I don't like admitting, because at the time I told myself I was relieved. But the truth is, after you notice something once, absolute normalcy doesn't feel reassuring anymore. It feels curated. By the 4th night, I started noticing something subtle about the elevator camera itself. The angle. It was mounted slightly higher than it needed to be, not enough to look wrong at a glance, just enough to create a shallow, downward tilt into the cab. From that position, the camera captured the floor display, the handrail, and most of the cabin interior, but not quite everything. If someone leaned forward in the cab, their face would slip partially out of the cleanest view. You'd still see movement, still see presence, but not the kind of clear facial detail you'd expect from a properly optimized security angle. It felt Intentional, not suspicious enough to report, not clean enough to ignore. I checked the maintenance notes in the system. The camera had been installed 6 years earlier. No adjustments logged, no service flags, no reason to question it. Still, the next night, I tried something small. At 12:47 a.m., during one of the elevator's automatic cycles, I leaned closer to the monitor and kept my eyes locked on the feed the entire time it moved. Floor by floor, 3, 4, 5. The elevator moved smoothly. No pause, no hesitation, nothing unusual. I remember feeling a quiet, almost embarrassing wave of relief. Until I switched to another camera, it was only for a second. Lobby feed, clear, back to elevator. And for just one frame, one single frame that might have been nothing if I hadn't already been watching so carefully, the floor display flickered between numbers. Not a glitch, not distortion, more like the number had corrected itself mid-transition. I rewound the footage immediately. On playback. Perfectly smooth. No flicker, no correction, no evidence of what I'd just seen. I sat back slowly in my chair and felt that same cold, quiet pressure return to the room, because by then, a pattern was starting to form. The elevator behaved normally, as long as I watched it continuously. But the moment my attention broke, even briefly, something about its behavior became less certain, less stable. And the worst part wasn't the movement itself. It was the growing sense that the system wasn't malfunctioning, it was waiting for gaps. Once that idea took hold, I stopped focusing only on where the elevator was. I started paying attention to when things happened. Night work does something strange to your perception of time. Hours don't pass the way they do during the day. They stretch, they compress. You stop trusting the clock and start trusting rhythms instead. The cycle of air vents, the dimming of lights, the soft electrical hum that rises and falls in predictable waves. The building had a pulse, and I knew it well enough to notice when something slipped out of sync. I went back through 3 weeks of elevator logs. On paper, everything looked clean. Trips recorded, floors listed, no faults, no delays. If someone higher up had reviewed the system, they would have signed off on it without a second thought. But the timestamps told a quieter story. The elevator's automatic movements almost always occurred within the same general window each night. Not identical times, but a pattern range, usually between 12:30 and 2 a.m. That alone wasn't strange. What bothered me was the clustering. The elevator was more likely to cycle during the exact periods when my routine naturally pulled my attention elsewhere. During perimeter walks, during log updates, during the brief check-in calls. At first, I told myself I was reaching. Humans are good at finding patterns where none exist, but the more nights I worked, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that the system wasn't just running on a timer. It was aligning. One night, around 1:18 a.m., I decided to test something properly. Instead of following my usual rotation, I sat perfectly still in the security chair and kept my eyes on the elevator feed longer than I ever had before. 5 minutes. 10. 15. The building settled into that deep overnight quiet, the kind where every sound feels padded and distant. The elevator didn't move. Not once. My eyes started to ache from staring. My shoulders tightened. There's a particular discomfort that comes from holding your attention too rigidly for too long. It starts to feel unnatural, like your body knows you're forcing something. At exactly 1:34, my phone vibrated softly against the desk. Reflex. Just instinct. My eyes dropped for less than a second. When I looked back, the elevator was already on the 7th floor, moving, smooth, uninterrupted, like it had been in motion the entire time. My stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition, because the timing was too clean, too efficient, too perfectly aligned with the exact moment my attention slipped. I rewound the footage again and again. According to the system, nothing unusual had happened. The elevator had begun its ascent at 1:33:58, 2 seconds before my phone vibrated, 2 seconds before my eyes dropped, which meant, according to the official record, the system had moved exactly when it was supposed to, but in the room, in real time, with my own eyes on the screen, the movement had only appeared after I stopped watching. I sat there for a long time after that, hands resting on the desk, feeling the quiet of the building settle around me like something patient. Because by then, the possibility I didn't want to consider was becoming harder to ignore. Maybe the elevator wasn't malfunctioning. Maybe it was behaving exactly the way it was designed to. just not for me. After that night, I stopped trying to catch the elevator doing something wrong. That might sound like giving up, but it wasn't. It was recalibration. When you work security long enough, you learn that forcing anomalies out into the open rarely works. Systems, mechanical or otherwise, tend to behave best when you don't antagonize them. So instead of watching harder, I started behaving differently. Subtly at first, I widened the gaps between my camera checks. Not enough to violate protocol, just enough to create small windows of inattention. I let my focus drift the way it naturally does during long overnight shifts. I stopped holding my posture so rigidly in the chair, and almost immediately the elevator became more active. Not dramatically, not in a way that would trigger a report, but noticeably. Its maintenance cycles began occurring earlier in the night, sometimes twice within the same hour. Once, I caught it moving between floors 3 separate times in a 40-minute window, something I had never seen in the previous months. Each time I checked the logs, everything was clean, everything was justified, everything was exactly what the system said it should be. But the feeling in the room had changed. The building no longer felt empty in the way it used to. It felt responsive. Like something in the background had become more comfortable with my presence now that I wasn't trying so hard to pin it down. That realization unsettled me more than any obvious malfunction could have, because it suggested something very specific. The system didn't react when I paid attention. It reacted when I behaved normally. The realization came slowly, the way most bad understandings do, not as a single moment, but as a series of small, quiet confirmations that eventually leave you with nowhere else to look. I started noticing my own behavior on the camera feeds, not just the elevator, me. There was a lobby camera angled toward the security desk, grainy, slightly washed out, but clear enough to show posture and movement. One night, out of idle curiosity, I pulled up the playback from earlier in my shift and watched myself sitting there. At first, nothing looked unusual. I filled out the log, shifted in my chair, checked the monitors. Normal, but the longer I watched, the more something about my movement started to feel economical. Too economical. I didn't fidget the way bored night guards usually do. I didn't stretch much. I didn't check my phone as often as I remembered. My posture remained unusually steady for long stretches of time. It wasn't rigid, it was efficient, like someone who had unconsciously learned the minimum amount of motion required to appear active. I replayed a 15-minute segment 3 times. Every movement I made was small, measured, contained. And then I noticed the part that made my chest tighten slightly. During the exact windows when the elevator performed its unscheduled movements, I was always looking somewhere else. Never at the elevator feed, never directly at the hallway monitors, always just slightly off. The pattern was too clean to dismiss. I wasn't catching the elevator moving because I wasn't meant to be looking when it happened. Not because something was hiding from me, because something was relying on me to behave predictably. That was the moment the thought finally formed, quiet and unwelcome. I wasn't monitoring the building. I was part of its routine. Once that idea settled in, I knew I had to try one more controlled test. Not aggressive, not obvious, just enough to confirm whether what I was seeing was coincidence or expectation. On a Tuesday night, slow, uneventful, the kind of shift where time moves like thick syrup, I changed one small thing in my routine. At 1:20 a.m., instead of beginning my usual camera rotation, I turned my chair slightly away from the monitors. Not fully, just enough that the elevator feed sat at the edge of my peripheral vision instead of the center. Then I sat completely still and waited. The building settled around me in layers of quiet. Air cycling through vents, distant electrical hum, the soft tick of the wall clock above the secondary monitor. For almost 6 minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, I felt it. Not a sound, not movement. A shift in the room's attention, the kind you normally only notice when another person enters your space and doesn't speak. My eyes stayed forward, peripheral only, and in that blurred edge of vision, I saw the elevator number change. Once, twice, moving, smooth, confident, like it had been waiting for permission. I turned my head, slowly, deliberately, back toward the screen. The elevator was already slowing to a stop on floor 8. Perfectly normal, perfectly documented, exactly what the system said it should be doing. But my hands, resting quietly on the desk, had already started to feel cold. because by then I wasn't wondering if the system reacted to attention. I was wondering how long it had been calibrating itself around mine. After that night, something in me stopped resisting the pattern, not out of fear, out of recognition. There's a point during long overnight work where your body begins to prioritize stability over curiosity. You stop pushing against small discomforts. You stop digging at things that don't immediately threaten you. You adapt, and adaptation is quiet. I returned to my normal routine, or at least something close to it. I stopped trying to catch the elevator in the act. I stopped replaying footage more than necessary. I wrote my logs with the same neutral tone management liked to see. I performed my rounds on time. I followed protocol. And the building settled. That's the part that stayed with me the most. It settled. The elevator cycles became smoother, less frequent, cleaner. The camera feeds looked calm in a way that almost felt satisfied, like whatever minor imbalance had existed before had corrected itself once my behavior returned to something more predictable. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no system faults, no obvious signs that anything had ever been wrong. But the feeling of being the only one on shift never fully came back. Instead, the building developed a different kind of presence. Not crowded, not occupied, just accounted for. Like my movements were being quietly factored into a larger process that didn't need to announce itself. And the worst part, after a few weeks, it stopped bothering me as much. I didn't quit the job suddenly. There was no final incident, no dramatic night where everything went wrong, no moment where the elevator doors opened onto something they shouldn't have. I just phased out, gave my notice, trained the replacement, finished my remaining shifts the same way I always had. Calm, methodical, predictable. On my last night, I sat at the security desk longer than usual, watching the monitors with that familiar low hum filling the room. The building felt balanced, quiet, efficient. The elevator didn't move for almost 2 hours. Around 2:03 a.m., my replacement, still new, still restless, stood up from the secondary chair and stretched too abruptly, bumping the edge of the desk with his knee. The movement was clumsy, unnecessary, human, and almost immediately, the elevator feed flickered with motion, floor numbers beginning to climb, smooth, automatic, right on schedule. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Because by then, I understood something I wasn't sure I was supposed to understand. The building didn't malfunction, it didn't hide, it didn't react to curiosity. It adjusted to behavior. When my shift ended that morning, I signed the log the way I always did. Same handwriting, same neutral tone, everything normal, everything secure. Weeks later, I still catch myself doing it sometimes, sitting a little too still in quiet rooms, glancing away from screens without meaning to, letting small gaps open in my attention. Old habits from night work. At least, that's what I tell myself. But every now and then, late at night, when I'm alone and a screen in front of me changes without sound, I still get the uncomfortable feeling that the elevator never needed me to watch it. It only needed me to behave the way I was always going to.